I didn't even realize that there was any debate about this. Geeks, it is time to dig into all things spooky. It's basically October at this point, and so I get to talk about one of my first loves. I have been a horror hound for most of my life. I was young when I was exposed to horror and grew up on Saturday morning cartoons, horror movies, and professional wrestling. And what better way to kick off spooky season than to talk about one of the first pieces of gateway horror that I saw, 1984's classic Terminator. Now, before Terminator made you think of a sci-fi apocalypse ruled by machines, there was simply a big, hulking, time-traveling killer robot that seemed more force of nature than man. Here's a question. Have you ever wondered why it seems like the Terminator franchise just can't seem to get a solid set of sequels underneath them? Have you ever wondered why most fans will go to one specific movie as the gem of all of the sequels and even go as far as to suggest multiple timelines and paradoxes to make it all make sense? Sure, there are very real world issues to consider in all of this, but before Terminator was a depressed AI powered look at the technopocalypse we are likely barreling towards, it was simply a dark and gritty slasher flick born and fully saturated in 80s American culture. A cyborg is sent back from 2029 to 1984 LA. An assassin known as a Terminator, disguised as a human male and programmed with one single mission in mind, and that is to hunt and eliminate a woman named Sarah Connor. Separately, a human soldier named Kyle Reese is also sent back to 1984 intent on stopping the Terminator. As they both arm up and get ready for battle, the Terminator, when in Rome, goes for the white pages and looks through a phone book at the listings for Sarah Connor and then goes through and systematically goes from Sarah Connor to Sarah Connor, eliminating one after another until he finally tracks her down to a nightclub, but she's rescued just in time by Kyle Reese, and the two speed off in a stolen police car. Now, I can hear some of the arguments at hand. You can't peg the Terminator as a slasher flick just because it's centered on a cold, emotionless killing machine who hardly says two words, can't even be stopped when literally pumped full of bullets, and is single-mindedly focused on a specific target. And yes, I can also hear you trailing off in stunned realization that you just made the first point for us. Schwarzenegger's T-800 has serious shape vibes from Halloween. He's literally adding a human element while still maintaining the relentless killing machine dynamic of it all. Midway through the film is where we actually start to get the establishment of the sci-fi backdrop for the story. The whole time, well within this very gritty urban setting that feels emblematic of the time. I mean, Kyle Reese breaks it down for us when he's talking about the threat that the Terminator poses. You could superimpose exactly what he says about the Terminator on either Jason or Michael in their respective franchises, and fans wouldn't bat an eye.
It can't be bargained with. It can't be reasoned with. It doesn't feel pity or remorse or fear. And it absolutely will not stop. Ever. Until you are dead.
For that matter, Reese himself manages to embody another slasher archetype, the guy who knows exactly what's going on, but who is apparently so out of his mind that nobody will listen to him until it's too late, of course. Then there's Sarah herself, a pretty excellent example of a trope so well known that without it, a movie is pretty much disqualified from being called a slasher flick. And the whole time, the Terminator is unrelenting. So the police apprehend Reese and Sarah after they're caught stealing supplies and they interrogate Reese, but they don't believe his story. The Terminator discovers that Sarah is inside the police station and just demolishes it, and he just goes into full attack mode. He takes out several people inside, all while hunting for Sarah. He gave a backstory to the force of nature, and it couldn't be killed by traditional means. The scenes where they show him in his robotic form are so menacing because you know inherently this thing is a machine. This thing is not a man, and it cannot be stopped by normal means. And yes, the scenes where you see him as part human, part robot, they definitely show their age, but I think the movie's better off for it, to be honest. There's something unnatural and uncanny about those scenes that fits in with the whole layer of grit and grime on the entire movie. So, Sarah Connor, and this is the final girl who, well, let's pull out our checklist. They typically have some sort of connection to the killer that she's usually unaware of. Check. Manages to survive while everyone is dropping like flies around her. Check. Often has help from a male protagonist who is eventually killed. Check. And is left alone to do battle with the killer at the end. Check. We even get the full home run where there are some boxes that they don't check as characters. And if you haven't been convinced yet that the Terminator at its core has the bloody heart of a slasher, it becomes glaringly apparent in the film's third act as Sarah and Kyle Reese are openly pursued throughout the streets of LA by a now mangled and grisly looking Terminator with no help or support in sight. They seem to get the better of their pursuer by blowing up the truck that he's chasing them in. But as the pair embrace and celebrate what seems like victory, the other shoe drops and we see the Terminator. Now, with all of its organic material burned away, down to its terrifying, gleaming metal skeleton, unwavering, unstoppable. Not only is this a great example of the killer demasked in the third act, but it's also certainly no coincidence that this shot is framed nearly identically to one near the conclusion of John Carpenter's Halloween, in which the seemingly dispatched Michael Myers reveals himself to the audience, but not his target, to be alive and kicking in pretty much exactly the same way. We think that the Terminator is all but finished as Kyle sacrifices his life to take out the Terminator with him, but the Terminator is not dead yet. Out of the wreckage comes half a skeleton crawling out towards Sarah. The Terminator's subsequent pursuit of Sarah throughout a manufacturing plant and its ultimate demise in a hydraulic press is also cut with an increasingly frantic pace that recalls the final confrontations of too many slasher flicks to even be able to list. All of that being said, I only recently found out that this was a point of contention. I saw another YouTuber make a video about this, and I was stunned that anybody could not see this as a pure out and out slasher flick that T2 picks up on and turns into a sci fi horror flick because horror sequels all kind of are coded in a similar way. They all tend to have a similar vibe, especially within the slasher genre. And in a lot of ways, T2 picks right up where Terminator left off. And it started to take on that sci fi horror vibe as technology continued to invade the home. So, geeks, sound off below. Let me know what you think of this movie, if you enjoy it, if you would classify this as horror, and what are some movies that you would classify as horror that other people may want a word about. While you're at it, go ahead and hit subscribe, tick that bell so that way you do not miss a single drop. Until next time, peace.